Hello and welcome back to another episode of Majlis and Markets. I'm your host Hassan Jivraj. In this podcast, we aim to bring you thought-provoking conversations of influential leaders in Islamic and global markets. Before we begin today's episode, as usual, wherever you're listening to this podcast, please remember to like, share and subscribe. It really does help us. In today's episode, we're doing a deep dive into Libya. Since the 2011 revolution, ousted longtime leader Muammar al Gaddafi, Libya has been in turmoil, with rival factions fighting each other for control amidst vast oil reserves. However, conflicts intensified notably after 2014, worsening the nation's instability. Last year, the IMF highlighted Libya's economic paradox. Despite high GDP per capita, challenges persist due to a heavy reliance on hydrocarbons. Additionally, devastating floods in September 2023 underscored climate risks. Joining us to navigate Libya's economic challenges is Naaman al, a seasoned Libyan investment banker. During our discussion, we explore the political landscape and economic challenges, including those affecting the banking and private sectors. Naaman al, welcome to Majlis and Markets. Good to have you here.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for your invitation, Hassan.
Naaman, you and I go back quite a while. It's been a while since we've spoken, but I first reached out to you way back in 2013, I think, when I first got to know you and what you were doing. And, you're probably one of the few people that I know that can talk about Libya, being a Libyan yourself and being based there. Could you tell us, but before we get into all of that, could you tell us like a little bit about your early life and how you got into banking?
Sure. So I went to study in Switzerland, my university, for uni, and part of the bachelor degree, I had to do a 3-month stage. So I reached out through a colleague at university to help me get a stage in Switzerland. I got a training program for 3 months in my last year with a local asset management company. And they offered me a job when they said, once you graduate, if you would like to join us, please do so. So I graduated in December 94, and on the 8th of January, I started working with them. And since then, I went into finance. So I started my first job in an asset management company as a young university graduate, doing, the donkey work for the asset managers. Then after 2 years, I got a job in a brokerage firm that was the introducing brokers for Salomon Smith Barney at the time. And I started doing US equities, and then went into futures, started doing commodity futures. Smith Barney was one of the largest brokers in the market for commodities. Worked for 4 years. Then I joined UBS. And at UBS, I went into the private banking side, doing advisory on the advisory team, and I was on the US equity desk. Then, after a year, I fell in love with equity derivatives, with convertible bonds, and I started doing converts. Then UBS offered me a job in Geneva. Went to Geneva to cover the Swiss French side. Then I started covering the Middle East, and I stayed at UBS for over 10 years doing convertible bonds and equity derivatives.
Great. And this was what, in the early 90s or the 2000s?
I started with UBS, you mean?
Just generally, like your career.
I started in January 1995 was the start of my
so nearly 30 years.
It is nearly 30 years ago, yes.
Well, very good, very good. And then where did Libya come into the picture?
Well, I'm Libyan, from Libyan parents. Grew up in Libya before I moved to the UK to do my GCSEs in 1997. And Libya was always, at my heart. Unfortunately, back in the 80s, Libya was going through a very difficult time. It was the embargo days. Education was completely destroyed. Foreign languages were not permissible in schools. Private schools closed down. So Libya was I would say, the midst of its black days back then in the 80s. I was fortunate enough to have parents that sent me to the UK to study. And in 2011, when the revolution happened, I was working in Switzerland and thought, Libya is moving into a new era. There might be ways to contribute, how we can, help. And that's when I really started concentrating on Libya in 2012. And 2012, 2013 were very good years. There was some light at the end of the tunnel for Libya. Unfortunately, the civil war broke out in July 2014. And since then, we have been in a political limbo and never came out of it.
Yeah, no, it seems that in the first 3 years, say from 2011 to 2014, there was a lot of hope for Libya. And then I guess, like as you said, there's been a lot of challenges over the past decade. But Naaman, before we get into Libya, like what are you doing today? Like what you mentioned about your career at UBS and in the other places, but what are you doing today?
Well, what I'm doing today is we've invested as a family. We've invested in multiple businesses in Libya since 2006. We've gone into oil services, co-invested into oil services, into IT, into banking in 2009. We took a minority stake in a local bank. And then in 2014, we founded the first private electronic payment company. Today we are, overseeing these investments. Locally, they're all managed by professional managers, local managers. But I sit on the board of a number of these investments on behalf of the family. And we're looking at the bank. We bought a stake into a local bank in 2009. The bank was badly run. It was, we invested into a license more than anything. We've managed, I would say, to turn a loss-making operation into one of the elite banks today in Libya in terms of reputation, in terms of services, in terms of quality of services, and it has become the employer of choice. We've managed to hire extremely good talent to run the bank. And recently, our recent venture is entrepreneurship, and we've been working with the European Union in developing support for startups in Libya. We've now signed the contract with the IFC as well to promote entrepreneurship with Supernova, with the European Union, and we are developing that sector because we believe the creation of a hybrid private sector in Libya is the only way to get out of the mess we're in today. And the youth of Libya is the only future for Libya. So we've been for the last year and a half investing heavily in supporting youth entrepreneurship so that we can, help these kids to come out of the mentality of war and civil war, which we have lived since 2014 until the 2020. And I think this is what we're focusing on lately.
Fantastic. Naaman, when we get into Libya, I really, what would you say Libya was like? Well, before we get into 2011, what would you say Libya was like? And you alluded to the 1980s, but up and say like the 2000s up until 2011, what was Libya's economy like, and what was the banking sector like back then?
Well, Libya prior to 2011, we have to say, prior to 2006, 2004, there was the socialist Libya, where it is a state run entirely by a centralized government, by one dictator. The private sector in Libya was vibrant. The private sector in Libya was 80% plus of the economy until 1978. In 1978, the regime nationalized everything. I mean, everything was nationalized, and the private sector was completely demolished, and the state took control of everything. And you can imagine a state taking control of the economy was a catastrophe. Until 2004, where the regime started embarking on certain reforms. And for the private sector to start taking its gradual natural position.
Yeah,
I think between 2004 and 2010, there was significant change compared to what it was before.
Mm.
But it was a shy change. I think it was a change enforced on the old regime than from within the old regime. So there was change, but it was going at a slow pace. It was led by one of the late colonel's sons, and that's where we, as well as a family, we started investing, because we thought things were really going to change, and there was willingness to change, despite the fact that it was slow. But we started investing in the country. However, the government upper hand and interference was still there. I mean, the state monopoly in a lot of the services offered to the public were state owned. The telecommunication was state owned. The utilities were state owned. The large factories were state owned. So, but the private sector slowly started, manufacturing of consumer products or consumable products. The private sector started going in, but people were still scared to take big steps, because whoever lived to 1978, they've seen in one day they've lost everything. So they were cautious in the way they invested. The revolution came 2011. There was really hope of a drastic change, a new Libya, a new vision, a new strategy, a new economy. Unfortunately, this didn't happen, because what happened is there was a removal of one man and his family, but the system remained as is. So nothing really happened in terms of economy. The state monopoly is still there on the majority of the services and the utilities into the country. What has changed is freedom of speech. Yes, everybody can speak. Everybody can express their thoughts, which was not possible prior to 2011. The economy is still 98% dependent on oil, because the state wants to run everything. And I think this is where the disappointment for a lot of the people and the businesses in Libya is. The government interference in businesses is still there. But obviously, because the issue is that the old regime, and one should not be talking about the old regime, because that's, they're 13 years ago. and we should have changed and done things differently. Unfortunately, we haven't. The system, the operating system that Libya was built in a way that everything is centralized. So the ministers are they are the General Assembly of the operating company. So, for example, you take a minister of transportation, you have the Ministry of Transportation owning the airline companies, or you take the telco, they own the Ministry of Telecommunication. You will find the Minister of Telecommunication is the head of the General Assembly of the 3 or 4 telco companies in Libya, the 2 operators and the other companies operating the sector. You go in the electricity, the JECO. So the entire system, the operating system in Libya is done in a way that is purely state functioning system. And that's why it has always failed to work. And that's why today Libya is in the state we are in today. We are still dependent on government enterprises. We're still dependent on oil. And the private sector doesn't represent more than 15% of GDP at max. So not big change has happened since the revolution when it comes to the economy.
Yeah, like I was just thinking before 2011, I remember when I think Tony Blair, he traveled to Libya, I think it was in the early 2000s or mid 2000s, and he met Muammar al Gaddafi, and it was a really landmark meeting. And I think people like Silvio Berlusconi and French president also, this was before 2011, visited Libya, and a lot of companies were expressing interest in doing business in Libya, and there was a lot of political maneuverings. And it seemed, I remember watching like CNBC or Bloomberg, and they would always like say Libya is like the next big thing. And I think the Economist had an article saying, Tripoli could be like the Dubai of Africa. And then obviously in 2011 everything kicked off. I mean, when the uprisings were happening across the region and they came to Libya, what were your initial thoughts?
Honestly, my initial thoughts was, this is heaven on earth. We were very positive, and we all thought, Libya is going to be, I would not say Dubai of Middle East, because Dubai is a state owned by one man or one family, and that's not in Libya. We don't want to be owned by one family. But we thought, well, this is going to be the Hong Kong of the Mediterranean. But the issue is, you can have all the resources you want, but if you don't have the brains to manage those resources, there's not hardly anything you can do with them. And I think this is our biggest issue in Libya today, is we do not know how to manage our resources. And that's obviously due to 40-odd years of a dictatorship, socialist regime, in a regime where education was deprived from people. Most people didn't have the proper education.
Yeah. It seemed, but like compared to the African countries or even Arab countries, would you say Libya before 2011 was doing okay, or would you say it was on the same footing?
No, it was. I would say Libya prior to 2011, it wasn't doing okay, but it was, as I said, the last 4 years, it was moving into a change. The issue is 65% of the Libyan population is below the age of 30 years old. So for the regime, there was a huge risk of, a revolution from within, because you've got so many young people, and these people need jobs. These people need to see, future. They need to have hope. So they started a slow change. They even started on a political direction, talking to the Muslim Brotherhoods and the Islamists, and where the regime for 30-odd years sidelined them and tabooed these organizations, but started because they were worried that something from within can explode. But the pace at which this openness and this change was happening, it was not fast enough, because it was done only for the protection of the dynasty, rather than an inside belief that this was important for the future of Libya.
Yeah, and then obviously when 2011 happened, it took I would say a couple of weeks and then the UN Security Council obviously came together, and then obviously led by France, or the US, France, and Britain, did this coalition backing a bunch of fragmented groups that were fighting against the government or the regime, depending on how you see it.
Yeah, I think obviously 19th of March, when the old regime was sent a convoy to crash the revolution in Benghazi, because the revolution started in the east. That's when the UN Security Council took the decision to intervene.
And then, do you think, since obviously the way all the events unfolded, do you think, obviously it wasn't very linear? Let's say there were a lot of other things happening, and then I think Libya had, and then obviously had the death, the killing of Muammar al Gaddafi in end of 2011, or towards the end of 2011, and then elections were in 2012. But it seems like the political transition didn't really take shape. Would you say that's fair, or was it different?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we have to understand that 42 years of no experience, no right for the public to perform any elections, to vote, to say their opinion. So what happened is that the Western world, or the international community, took down Gaddafi, but didn't take the Libyans by the hand all the way to bring them into, the safe destination point. So we were left to decide on our own how to politically change the political scene and decide on what political model we wanted to be in. And I think this is where we failed. We had no experience.
And why do you think the Western countries didn't want to, help in the state building of Libya?
I don't know. I mean, honestly, when you talk to ambassadors and delegates from abroad, they were always, they tell you, and they might have the right, is we didn't want to impose on Libyans what they should do. So we left it to the Libyans to decide what to do. And unfortunately, we couldn't decide. Okay, because first of all, we didn't know. I mean, most people, they don't even know what the difference is between a presidential republic or a parliamentary republic. So which model did they want to? And then obviously there was, the Islamists came on board. They jumped the wagon. They had their own political agenda, which is the same that they had in Egypt and they had in Tunis, and then they failed in Egypt. They were overthrown in Egypt, and then Tunisia, Edom. They were hungry for power. Libya was a grab for them because, having lost Egypt, they wanted to really maintain Libya because Libya, was their last resort. But then Libyans didn't accept them anymore, and that's what we also see today. That I don't think anybody will vote for an Islamic state. So I think first of all, we know very well, in any revolution, it's going to take years and years of trial and error before you get to the right model you want to be in. What my belief, the biggest mistake we made back in 2012, and unfortunately, it was us Libyans, most Libyans. Okay, we had a constitution, 1963 revised constitution from the 1951 constitution, and that should have been the interim solution for Libya. They should have taken that constitution, amended it very briefly to take away the kingdom and stuff, because I think people were not ready for kingdom at the time. I mean, it would have been an option for people to vote on, to go back into kingdom again, or to go into parliamentary republic or a presidential republic, but it should have been an option. Instead, we thought, and the people at the time at the GNC and the transitional office, they just thought, no, why should we go back into the monarch constitution? We can write it ourselves. We can do it from scratch. And that's where we went wrong. And we never wrote the constitution.
Mm. And then I think you said at the top of the show that that probably since 2014 is when it's all gone pretty horribly wrong, right? And you look at figures like this guy Khalifa Haftar and other players as well. It seems like they're just all like fighting against each other and can't really get their act together.
I think we have to understand. I mean, in 2014, when the elections were lost by the Islamists, and they did not approve of the outcome, and the country split, there was radical movements in the east of Libya, and when the marshal came in at the time, it was to fight terrorism. There was terrorism in Gaza.
Naaman, when you say the country was split, for our listeners, what do you mean when the country was split?
Well, after the revolution, there was a transitional GNC, the General National Congress, acted as a parliament, called for elections in July 2014 to go into a permanent Congress or permanent parliament. The outcome of the elections in 2014 were not accepted by a certain group. So these people refuted the election, the results of the election. So the voted parliament, the winners, went and set up a parliament in Tobruk, in the city of Tobruk, which is in the Libyan-Egyptian border,
right,
close to Egypt in the eastern side. The
completely different government.
The members of the GNC that supposed to have handed over to the new parliament, but refused the outcome of the elections, maintained their position as a secondary parliament in the west of Libya. The new parliament in the east nominated the prime minister. He formed his government. These guys here in the west nominated their government, and we had two parliaments, two governments, two central banks. So literally, we had two of everything.
Right. And I think if people know Libya's history, Libya was I think if I'm not mistaken, before, a long time ago, it was three countries, right? Or three territories.
There were three emirates. Yes, Fazan, Tripolitania and Cyrenaica, and they were united in 1952.
And this was under King Idris before.
Exactly, he was made Amir or king for the three states.
Right. And do you think that history is kind of having an impact on like what happened with the split in the parliaments?
Yes and no. Okay, because back then it was Tripolitania, Cyrenaica, and Fezzan. What happened in 2014 up to 2018? There wasn't an east, west, or south. You would find people from the west that went and joined the government in the east and the parliament in the east, and vice versa. So you found members in the GNC in Tripoli that were from the south or from the east, and you find members in HOR, the parliament in the east, that were representing Tripoli, the western cities. So no, it wasn't the same. It wasn't the same. It was more of an Islamic groups, movements that did not accept the elections or the outcome of the elections. They formed their state. They couldn't, I would say, accept the fact that there was no place. Libya was never a hardcore Islamist country. Libya has always been moderate Islam, and people were not ready. And obviously, with what was happening in Egypt and what was happening in Tunis, people realized that we don't want to be a hardcore Islamic state.
Right. And these different administrations, they obviously had external supporters, right? That's what's usually.
Unfortunately, this is one of our biggest problems in Libya is obviously the external supporters. But I would not say they're external supporters. They are states that have interest in Libya. Everybody have different interests, and they need to protect their interests. And, it's their right to look for their interests. It's us Libyans that are helping them safeguard their interest at our own cost. So yes, you had the Turks supporting the government in the west of Libya, and then you had the Egyptians and the Emiratis and the Saudis in the east.
And the internationally recognized government was in the west, right?
No, from 2014 to 2018, there was no internationally recognized government.
So yeah,
we were in a limbo state.
Right.
Okay. Then in 2018, there was this Khairat Accord, where they created a second chamber. Okay, so they came with the international, with the UN, UNSMIL. They came with the idea that HOR is the parliament, and the GNC in Tripoli becomes the state council, and it's like a consultative body to the parliament.
Right.
Both of 200 members each, and a unified government was formed. Was called at the time the Presidential Council, made of 3 people, one headed by somebody from the west of Libya, somebody from the south representing Fezzan, and somebody from the east. And these guys were jointly together the president of the country.
Right. And that happened in 2018, right?
2018, yes.
And is it the same situation today?
Or was it 18 or or 17. Honestly, I can't remember. I think maybe 17 it happened, 2017.
Right.
Then, obviously, these guys were supposed to nominate a government, and the government to take its approval or blessing from Parliament. The Parliament did not. They presented the government the first round. I think they presented 36 ministries. Then Parliament asked for a reduction of the number of ministries. Then the second round, they went and presented, but then it was refuted. Then they created the government in the West. And they were operating here in the West, yet they were the recognized government because it was a government that was born through the UN initiative. Then the Parliament in the East went and nominated, or actually continued with the same government that was there, which is Abdullah Thani. And we had a split. And that split run again until the Geneva Accord, which was the Berlin Accord or the Berlin Plan in 2021. Again, it was the same model, the presidential council, but the presidential council is to nominate a prime minister who in turn selects his government and not them selecting the ministers. So, I'm wrong there. There was a presidential council that came out of the Berlin or the Geneva Accord and a prime minister from there. And that's when Beiba was voted or chosen. There was no voting. It was chosen in Geneva with a presidential council made up of, again, East, West, and South. The presidential council's role is a symbolic role, representing Libya in international affairs and so forth, and working on the al-musalaha and the unification of the country. And the prime minister is to select his government, and their role was to work on 5 main activities back then. Obviously, it was start of COVID, so it was COVID. Libya, we had major electricity cuts back then that lasted up to 16 hours a day. So it was working on electricity, health, working on the elections, preparation for elections, because this government or this setup was supposed to be a temporary setup for 18 months. And here we are today, 3 years down the road. There was no unification. We have a government in the East and a government in the West. COVID has disappeared on its own. Electricity, yes. Electricity situation is much better today. Elections, we don't even know. They don't even hear of them anymore. And it's 3 years down the road, and the international community is still recognizing the same government that when they came out with this formula, it was a temporary 18-month formula. And yet today, this government and this setup, can last for another 10 years. We have absolutely no light at the end of the tunnel here.
And why do you think the international community hasn't really taken an interest in Libya in the past decade?
I think there's many issues. The UK was going through, Brexit. The Americans had no interest in Libya. The Americans' interest in Libya, we had for 5 years, the Americans didn't even appoint an ambassador to Libya. We had a charge d'affaires for 5 years. The American The Italians, they have their own problems, and all they care about is two things: is the gas pipeline into Italy and the illegal immigrations. The French, they had their own problems. Who are you? These are the main players in the country. The Americans started to play a very important role, and yes, today they are at the forefront of the role, is when the Russians became apparent in Libya. It's the existence of the Russians, and all they care about is to ensure that there are no Russian interests or Russian presence in Libya. And that's what the Americans care about, nothing more.
Right. And Naaman, when you look at the economy, and you touched a little bit on that, say from like 2014 to say 2020 up until COVID, how was the Libyan economy in that 5 or 6 year period?
From when to when, sorry?
Or from 2014, or even say 2011 up until COVID, what was the economy doing okay, like with oil production and things, or was
No,
it
okay. I remember in 2000, from 2014 to 2016, we had complete oil shut. When the initial breakup of the civil war, oil stopped pumping for over a year. So can you imagine oil stopped pumping with two governments, East and West, over 1.5 million people working for government enterprises and ministries, so they're on the national salary bill. And that's when Libya was spending out of its reserves. Obviously, one good thing that the old government left is they left Libya in a very healthy financial state. There was over $130 billion of reserves at the Central Bank of Libya, and a sovereign wealth fund of 60 billion or so. And that's what we've spent. And if you look today, our reserves from 130 billion at the Central Bank, they're down to 60, 70 billion dollars, despite the fact that we have been producing oil for the last 5 years. If you take away 2015, 5-6 years, we've been producing oil and selling oil.
Yeah. And then what about the non-oil sector? Was there any activity there, or was it?
None so far. And what was prior to 2012, 2011 is similar today.
Right.
Oil represents 98% of the GDP.
That's a lot. Yeah. So it's heavy reliance on oil and oil output and export. And where does Libya export a lot of its oil to? Is it mainly to Europe, or is it to other countries?
Europe.
And obviously, with the post-COVID and then the Russia-Ukraine conflict, there's been a big spike in energy prices. Did that help Libya post-Russia?
I mean, Libya today, if it wasn't for the Ukraine issue and the oil prices at where they are today, we would be in deep trouble. Because our expenditure exceeds our oil revenues. And for this reason, the Libyan dinar has been devalued by over 80%.
So yeah, lost a lot of the currency value.
We had a wage bill in 2000. A civil servant wage bill in 2010 of around 14 to 16 billion dinars. Today is 60 billion.
So it's a lot, yeah, the public sector. Naaman, what would you say, like you touched a little bit on Libya's economic challenges, like obviously the over-reliance on oil, lack of diversification. What other challenges is Libya facing economically?
The biggest challenge Libya is facing economically is the operating model. The government owning economic enterprises and wants to play the role of the businessman as well as the role of the state. And this is the biggest issue.
So the over-involvement of the state in the economy is the biggest challenge, you would say?
This is the biggest challenge we have.
So not subsidies, not undeveloped.
Okay, but subsidy is Libya's catastrophe. Okay, subsidies in Libya today, oil subsidy or fuel subsidy in Libya. Fuel subsidy today in Libya eats 60% of our oil revenues.
Mm-hmm.
It fuels most wars that happen are fueled by oil subsidies. It's fueling the stability in Libya and into our neighboring countries.
Right. So, and then what other challenges are there? An undeveloped banking sector? Because I was reading an IMF report from the back end of last year, and it talked about how I think 3 banks in Libya control about 70% of all the banking assets, or 3 or 4 banks control about 70%, and they're all state-owned.
Okay, yeah, because you see, prior to 1996, all the banks in Libya were state-owned banks, and they were not state-owned from day one. So these are banks that were nationalized in 1978.
Right.
They were private banks. Some of them for example, the largest bank in Libya, Jamhuriya Bank, was Bank Kadiron. Barclays Bank, and all of these were banks that were operating in Libya, and they were nationalized in 1978 and became state-owned banks.
Right.
And these banks were for the 42 years of 42, I would say, from 78 to 1996, those 20 odd years, they were safety deposit boxes for people to deposit their salaries and withdraw their salaries, and for these banks to finance government-run projects.
Mm-hmm.
Then in 1996, obviously the private banks were allowed, but they were allowed as cooperative banks. So many of them were born, but very badly managed. Then the Libyan banking law was issued in 2005. Started gradually working at improving the status of the banking sector. I must admit the development that happened in the banking sector, despite you're starting from zero, you're starting from primitive status of the banking sector. So making steps forward shouldn't be difficult. But there was very, very important steps taken from 2005 to 2010. There was also a sale of two stakes. One to BNP Paribas and Sahara Bank, and one to Arab Bank and Wahda Bank of 19% each, with a management role for both of those banks and these 2 Libyan banks, these 2 Libyan state banks at the time. The revolution came. The 2012, 2013, there was a unified central bank of Libya. We've just come out of a war. 2014 comes, the central bank splits, no board of directors, one branch in the east run by one person, one branch in the west, in the west run by one person, the branch that was created in the east run by the vice governor and 3 other board members. But they were not recognized by the international community. So the international community only recognized the bank in the west of Libya or in Tripoli. Oil revenues were going, there was a part when revenues, when oil was pumping again, and we were selling oil in 2015, back towards the end of 2015, revenues were funneling into the bank in the east and the west. So there was until obviously 2022, when the unification of the central bank started to take shape. Okay, it's not 100% unified, but started to take shape. So no developments, no improvement in the banking sector in Libya until the last 12 months, because we had two central banks.
Yeah.
So we do have a very, very ailing banking sector, despite the fact that I must say that with its destructive conditions, the banking sector in Libya, and also with a split central bank, but the commercial banks did not split, and they managed to provide services to the citizens from far east to far west, far south, far north of Libya, without stopping, with all the problems that the country was going through. And this is something that we must give credit to the banks for.
Right. And Naaman, I think when we interacted in 2013, I think Libya this is obviously before all the stuff happened in 2014, but there was talk of them doing a Sharia compliant financial system. Is the financial system in Libya?
Yeah, but this was one of the things when the Muslim Islamists, I don't know if the word Islamist is the right word to use, but I would say the Muslim Brotherhoods, when they took over and they were in control, the first thing they did was they issued an amendment to the banking law, which was Amendment number 1 of 2013. The first law that comes out of 2013 is to convert the banking system in Libya to 100% Sharia compliant.
Yeah.
And I'm not here to criticize or support Islamic banking. I think it's a product, it's a system that can be looked at, but we, apart from Iran and Sudan until recently, because I know they've changed, there is no system in the world which is 100% Sharia compliant. And not more than that is the fact that you need to prepare the human resources to run Islamic or Sharia compliant banks. And we didn't have the experience. We don't have the human caliber for that. And to issue a law in January 2013 with immediate implementation, it just brought the banking system on its knees.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I remember the banks in Libya were in a lot of trouble back then. And do you think things like fintech have helped the banking sector over the past decade?
Yeah, there has been a lot of attempts. Unfortunately, as I said, we even started the first private electronic payment company, Tadawul Tech, in 2014. There are no rules and regulations. So we were operating in an unregulated market.
Mm.
But yes, these fintechs really helped Libyans at difficult times, because in 2015, 2016, we had major liquidity issue. And it's thanks to the private fintechs that managed to provide solutions to the Libyans to ensure they can buy goods and services when they could not get access to their money from the banks.
Right. And these are all domestic fintech companies, or are they regional or
Yes.
international?
All domestic.
Right.
Nobody's going to come and invest in Libya with the current status.
Yeah. Well, I'll get into the towards the end. I wanted to ask you a question about where do you see Libya going? What does Libya have to offer investors? But the one other area I wanted to ask about, Naaman, was obviously last year there was some devastating floods in Tripoli. Sorry, in Dar. It's not, we just seen in Dubai a few days ago, there was, really bad flooding and in other countries as well. How big of a risk is climate to Libya in addition to all the political and economic challenges?
It's very risky. The infrastructure in Libya is not there. You come to Libya, Hassan, and you come to Tripoli, or you go to Benghazi, or you go to any city in Libya, there's no difference. The basic infrastructure is not there. So climate change is a huge threat for Libya.
Yeah, not just from flooding, but from extreme heat and desertification and these kind of things, right?
From everything.
But why, Naaman? Libya is such a wealthy country in terms of its resources. Why can it not?
Again, Hassan, I told you, we do not know how to manage our resources. Simple. You can have all the resources in the world. Resources need to have plans of how to invest them. And they need to have, first of all, you need to have a will, a clear plan, implementation steps, and people that can run it and manage it. And we don't have any of that. We have been running Libya since prior to 2011. It was, a dictatorship run by one man. Since then, we have been going through these interim governments that come in there for 18 months. So, all the plans were 18 months, and none of them stayed for 18 months, okay? The last one stayed for 5 years. And this one now is going also into its fourth year very soon. So when they come in and you tell these governments that you're there for 18 months, the last thing they want to do is put a plan for the next 10, 15 years. So all their plans are short-lived plans from here until tomorrow, and then what happens? The guy next to me pays the bill. The guy behind me pays the bill. That's the mentality, and that's the way that we've been going since 2011.
No, it's a bit of an unfortunate situation.
And we're here now again, the international community, after talking about again another transition. We're not going to give it. You can't build a country with transitional governments that are there for 18 months because again, because the model is all government dependent. Usually these plans have nothing to do with the government. These plans are nation plans that governments come to continue the implementation of them. So we don't have plans that are being put by nations.
Yeah.
Because every prime minister that comes, he heads these institutions, and he heads the government, the funds and the ministries and the state government. So every government comes, wants to run, implement with a different approach, with a timeline that it's there. They see that, we're supposed to be out in 18 months, rather than, governments get voted for. They know what the plan, the national plan is, or the economic national direction, and they come and they make projects that fit and fall within an overall strategy. There are no strategies.
Yeah.
There was back in 2010, there was the Michael Porter and there was Libya 2020, and all of this is gone.
And trying to look at a more positive picture, Naaman, what can Libya do, and what can Libya offer to international companies and investors? Is there anything that they can do to improve the current situation?
Honestly, we've never had foreign investors coming and invest in Libya unless it's the oil sector. And the oil sector, we know that's a small sector. What Libya needs to do now, it needs to change its operating model. The level of corruption today is intriguing. No registered listed company on any stock exchange in the world is going to come and touch Libya with a stick. The corruption is just, I think we've excelled in the corruption list in Africa. I think we're number 3 in Africa. Unless the government does its job and pulls out and starts allowing the private sector to take its role, and then the private sector can come and joint venture with the international investors or international consultants or international technical partners and so forth. But for them to come and partner with the government and to get the deal, they need to pay here, right, left, and center. I don't think you're going to get it. It's only in the oil sector. And even in the oil sector, we have not seen one new oil company entering Libya. All the people that are there are prior to 2010 operating.
And what about other sectors, Naaman? Do you see any opportunities? You see on
opportunities. Libya has tremendous opportunities. But I know, we have a 2,000-kilometer of virgin coastline on the Mediterranean. We have amazing location. We could be supplying energy to Europe, solar energy. But today I think with what's happening in Morocco, with Chapeau, bravo, what's happening in Algeria now, and I think they are supplying Africa, and we missed that opportunity of supplying solar energy into Europe. However, there's so much. I mean, today, if you look at Europe, you do not find refineries anymore in Europe. Nothing. Everything is being moved out because of pollution, because of and so forth. Libya, we produce 1.2 million barrels a day. We consume roughly 600,000 barrels of fuel and stuff for our local domestic. We ship oil to Europe to refine it and bring it back. So there is no upstream activities in Libya. There's so much that can be done.
And what about things like tourism or logistics or agriculture?
Agriculture, definitely. Tourism, there's no tourism. You can't develop tourism without that.
When you see YouTubers, for example, traveling to parts of Libya or to Tripoli, you see these travel vloggers going around Libya, showing all the different Roman sites and things like that. You don't think there's opportunity for tourism in Libya?
There is huge opportunities for tourism in Libya, because we have on the eastern side of Libya we have Greek ruins, Greek cities. On the western side we have Roman cities. You go to the south, to Ghat, to Al-Wahad area, gorgeous. But today you don't have the infrastructure. 2, you don't have tourists. They will come. They want an open society. They want to be able to enjoy their holiday. They want to be able to have their alcohol, and we've seen it. I went to Oman in 1996 for work, when it was alcohol was not permissible and stuff. There was no tourism. People went to Oman, to Dubai and so forth. when now they opened up and stuff, you start seeing Oman being on the list of touristic destinations. So we need to open up. We need to loosen up. Libya has all the ingredients for becoming a destination hub for tourists, and especially people who are looking at archaeological sites. But with being a dry country, I personally don't see that it will be a massive destination.
Mm. And Naaman, as we bring the podcast to a close, what are your thoughts for the next couple of years and for the rest of 2024 and 2025? Do you see it as business as usual, continued chaos and continued malaise of Libyan politics?
Well, so far today, unfortunately, the situation is quite blurry. The political division is grieving even more. And unless we come out with a solution, and very soon a solution, things can drag to the worse. It's unfortunate to say it, but the people in power everywhere, they are not interested in whatsoever in the change of the status quo, because the status quo is chaotic. There is no accountability. Money is being spent and looted right, left, and center. And this is heaven on earth.
Mm. So you have no optimism?
I used to be an optimist, but this year I don't. I think one needs to be realistic, unless there is serious intention by the international community. And again, I'm sorry to say, because it should not be them, but it should be us Libyans deciding to, get our acts together. But because we have demonstrated our inability to know what's better for us and what's best for us and our future generation, we need help. We need help, and we cannot be left to the current politicians to find that exit, because they're not going to do it. They're not going to do it.
Yeah. And Naaman, what are your current projects and future projects? Do you have anything interesting coming up?
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at a number of projects, despite the fact that Libya is becoming very, very difficult to make business in, because it's an unfair ground field. Despite that, we have not stopped developing. We have not stopped investing in Libya, because we really believe in Libya. We really believe in the future of Libya, and we want to be part of bringing hope to the Libyan people and to the youth, of whom are our future. Without them, I think there's no hope for Libya. We're looking into more into the technology side. We're investing heavily in technology and financial technology companies, and with this incubator accelerator program that we are working on, as I told you, with the IFC or with the European Union, we are looking at a lot of these startups, a lot of these young people that have amazing solutions and commitment to develop something and to improve the livelihood of Libyans. And we will be investing in quite a number of these startups.
Great. And Naaman, do you publish your thoughts on social media, or are you active on social media?
Not often. No, not much.
And what's the best way for people to reach you with their ideas or want to talk to you and stuff?
I'm reachable. People reach out on phone, WhatsApp, Viber, Messenger. So I'm happy to meet and discuss with people anytime. And we every Thursday we have what we call Salon, an economic lounge, where we invite young people through our programs. They come, they share their ideas, and we share our thought, our ideas, recommendations for them, how best to do things, where we believe that from our experience they can benefit and hopefully flourish and prosper.
Great. This has been great. Naaman al-Bouri, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you very much to you. Thank you, and have a nice evening.